I stood on my own front porch on Christmas Eve and heard my daughter-in-law raise her glass. Thank God she didn't show up. I didn't go inside. I didn't say a single word. I just made one phone call, and 15 minutes later, their whole party was over. I was running late to my own family's Christmas gathering. As I reached for the cold doorknob, I heard my daughter-in-law's voice drift through the wood. Thank God she didn't come. Glasses clinked. Nobody wants her here anyway. She laughed bright and sharp. I stood there on the porch, with snow drifting softly onto my coat, catching every word. My son stayed completely quiet. That silence told me everything I needed to know. My name is Clara. I'm 66, a widow for 5 years now. The house they were celebrating in, it's mine, a well-kept duplex on the edge of town. After my husband passed, I moved into the smaller ground floor apartment so my son and his wife could have the main house. Rent-free, of course. I wanted to give them a solid start. But gratitude has a short shelf life, especially when people start mistaking kindness for something they're owed. I didn't stand there crying in the cold. Tears are just wasted energy when you need it for clear decisions. I turned around, walked back to my car, and pulled out my phone. In most stories, this is when someone calls the cops or causes a huge scene. Not me. I called my attorney and property manager, Mr. Weber. In that moment, he was more than just a lawyer. He was the messenger of the new reality I'd already set in motion. 15 minutes later, their party would be finished. Not with yelling or drama, but with one simple, undeniable fact. To understand how a mother ended up standing outside her own house on Christmas Eve, we need to go back a few months. It all started in late summer when I began noticing the little shifts in my own home. There weren't any big fights, just quiet, creeping disrespect. Lena had started testing my boundaries one small push at a time. And at first, I made the mistake of staying quiet to keep the peace. But peace bought with someone else's surrender isn't peace. It's just a deadline. And mine had finally run out that December night. I knew exactly what I was doing. My plan had been in motion for weeks. That August, Lena started treating the shared spaces like they belonged to her alone. It began with small things. My flower pots on the back patio got quietly swapped out for her sleek gray concrete ones without a word. When I mentioned it, she gave me that patient little smile people use on confused old ladies. It just looks so much cleaner, Clara. You don't have to mess with all that dirt anymore, she said, already turning back to her laptop. My son sat right there and just nodded. He's always been the type who'd rather disappear than take a side. A few weeks later, I noticed the spare key to my apartment was missing from the hook in the hallway. I asked my son about it. Lena answered for him. Oh, I took it. In case of an emergency, or if we need something from the basement while you're asleep. An emergency. In my own house. Without asking. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, but I stayed perfectly calm. I didn't explain or argue. The next morning I called a locksmith and had my locks changed. Paid for it myself. When Lena showed up at my door a week later, irritated that her key didn't work, I opened it with a coffee cup in my hand. The old lock was sticking, I said evenly. I had a new one put in. And where's our new key? She snapped. In my pocket, I answered and gently closed the door. There was no big fight, no shouting. But in that moment, she realized I wasn't the frail pushover she'd hoped for. I wasn't giving up my space. She didn't respond with understanding. She started planning how to make me feel exactly who she thought was really in charge. She wanted to keep enjoying my financial generosity while offering zero respect in return. What she didn't know was that I'd already started reviewing my statements and quietly cutting off every automatic payment for their daily conveniences. After the lock incident, the air in the house got a lot colder. Lena began treating me like an annoying neighbor in my own backyard. She'd invite friends over for cookouts without telling me. They'd sit on the patio my late husband built, drinking wine and acting like I was invisible. Instead of getting mad, I used that time at my desk going through old files. It was eye-opening how many ongoing expenses I was still covering for them. The pricey insurance on their second car, the weekly cleaning service for the main house, all those food delivery subscriptions, everything still running on my account. I'd set it up years ago to help my son through college. Now he was in his early 30s, making decent money. But the charges kept rolling. Lena bought expensive clothes and ordered packages every week while I carried the baseline cost of their lifestyle. I didn't march over to complain or cry. I simply called my bank. By lunchtime, I'd canceled the car insurance payments, ended the cleaning contract for the main house, and stopped every subscription. Everything was strictly separate now. If they wanted to live like owners, they could start paying owner bills. 3 days later, when their car sat there uninsured, my son knocked on my door, looking panicked. Mom, the insurance company emailed. The payment didn't go through. Lena needs the car for work. I looked at him calmly. I stopped the automatic payment for your car, Marcus. You're both adults. You can handle it yourselves. He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. But that's going to cost us hundreds extra a month. Then you'll need to budget better, I said, closing the door gently and going back to my book. I'm sure Lena was raging next door, but that was no longer my problem. I'd cut the financial umbilical cord quietly and for good. It was the first real moment they felt my patience had run out. I didn't need to raise my voice to win, but Lena's counterattack came fast. Lena's response to my cuts was subtle but clear. She started systematically freezing me out of family life. Sundays when I used to come over for coffee, the door was suddenly locked. If I was out pruning my roses, she'd call loudly for Marcus to come inside, like my mere presence was an inconvenience. She painted me as the cheap, bitter old woman making her son's life difficult. My son, always conflict-averse, barely spent time with me anymore. When we crossed paths in the driveway, he'd look at the ground and mumble quick excuses. I could have been sad. I could have knocked on their door begging for love and attention. A lot of mothers my age do exactly that. They let themselves be humiliated just to keep seeing their kids or grandkids. But I saw the situation crystal clear. Lena wanted me isolated, so I'd eventually give up and hand her full control. So I didn't respond with words. I responded with action. I spent more time with my own friends, took classes, and built my own social circle. Most importantly, I quietly had the true market value of my property assessed. One afternoon, a dark sedan pulled up. Mr. Weber, the real estate expert I trusted, stepped out. Lena watched suspiciously from the kitchen window as we walked the property. We spoke softly, took notes, and he nodded approvingly at the roof's condition. I caught Lena's face behind the glass. She probably thought I was just planning some renovations. She had no idea I'd already signed the first papers. I was building my quiet, structured exit. I knew the decisive moment was coming, and I wanted to be perfectly ready. The holidays were approaching fast, and with them, Lena's biggest mistake. She was planning a big party to show off her perfect life right here in my house, using the money they'd saved by living off me. It was supposed to be the crowning moment of her little self-made kingdom. A fatal miscalculation. Mid-December, Lena dove into planning her big Christmas Eve bash. It was going to be the social event of the year for her circle. Delivery vans pulled up for days. Expensive catering boxes, rented furniture, and huge floral arrangements disappeared into the main house. The crazy part. She did all of it in a property that belonged to me while actively shutting me out. I never got a real invitation. Instead, my son muttered as he passed me, "You know Lena's people are coming on Christmas Eve. It'll probably get pretty loud. Maybe you'll want a quiet night in front of the TV." He couldn't even look me in the eye. He knew exactly what he was doing. I just smiled mildly and said, "Don't worry about my evening, Marcus. I already have plans." He looked relieved I wasn't making a scene and hurried back inside. Meanwhile, I'd made my own preparations. The listing agreement for the duplex was signed. The buyers, an older doctor couple, had agreed and wanted to take over right after the new year. The legal side was straightforward. No formal lease meant I could revoke the free use arrangement any time. No courts, no months of fighting. Just a pen, my ownership rights, and absolute emotional clarity. On the afternoon of Christmas Eve, I calmly packed my important documents and a few personal items into small boxes. My apartment was neat and ready. Outside, I could hear the first guests laughing, plates clinking and festive music spilling from the windows of my house. They were celebrating in rooms they hadn't bought and hadn't earned. I put on my best black coat, added a touch of red lipstick, and picked up my purse. I'd decided I wasn't hiding anymore. This evening was going to be unforgettable, just not in the way Lena imagined. I grabbed my keys and the official envelope I'd prepared, then stepped out into the cold December air. The party was in full swing, and in that perfect moment I was done being the silent observer. So there I was, standing on my own porch in the cold, while inside Lena raised her glass. Thank God she didn't come. Nobody wants her here anyway. The guests' laughter carried clearly. Years earlier, that moment would have shattered my heart. I might have cried, quietly retreated, and spent days doubting myself. But that night, I felt only icy, perfect clarity. There was no bond left holding me back. No misplaced loyalty to a son who let his wife humiliate the woman who had given him everything. I didn't open the door for a dramatic scene. I didn't beg for love. Like I said at the beginning, I simply called Mr. Weber. Remember the title mentioning a lawyer? He's actually an attorney. But he wasn't coming to file a lawsuit or threaten police. He came as my representative for the house sale to deliver one simple but powerful document: the immediate termination of their free use agreement and the official notice of the ownership change. No legal gray areas, no cruelty, just the hard, clean reality of property ownership. While I waited for him, I watched through a gap in the curtains. My son stood at the edge of the room with a glass of red wine, looking distracted. Lena, on the other hand, was glowing the perfect hostess in a house that would soon no longer be hers. When Mr. Weber's headlights swept up the driveway, I knew there was no turning back. He stepped out in his dark coat, important folder tucked under his arm, and gave me a serious nod. "Good evening, Clara. Are you ready?" "More than ready," I answered calmly. We walked the few steps to the front door together. I unlocked it, turned the handle, and with a soft click, the heavy wooden door opened. The sound of voices from the living room hit us immediately. No one had noticed us entering the hallway. I hung my coat casually and stepped slowly into the brightly lit room. The laughter didn't stop right away. It took a few seconds for the guests nearest me to fall silent and stare. The quiet spread like a wave across the room until Lena finally turned around. Her triumphant smile froze when she saw me, and froze even harder when she spotted Mr. Weber in his suit right behind me. "Clara," my son said uncertainly, stepping forward. "What are you doing here? I thought you had plans." "I do," I replied, completely calm. I didn't raise my voice. When you're in the right, you don't need to shout. I turned to the guests. "Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry to interrupt your party, but as the owner of this house, I need to ask you all to leave the premises within the next 20 minutes. The house has been sold, and we need to conduct a formal walkthrough." A murmur went through the crowd. Lena went pale, then flushed with anger. "Have you lost your mind?" she hissed, stepping toward me. "You can't just throw our guests out. This is our home." I looked her straight in the eye. No tears, no shaking. "It was your home, as long as I kindly allowed it. You seem to have forgotten who made that luxury possible." Mr. Weber stepped forward and calmly handed my son the official envelope. This is the termination of your rent-free usage rights, Mr. Miller. Because your wife has permanently damaged the relationship of trust, the immediate vacant notice applies by the end of the month. The closing with the new buyers is already complete. My son took the letter with trembling hands like it was burning him. Guests were already quietly grabbing their coats. Nobody wanted to be part of this awkward family scene. Lena tried desperately to stop them, calling out that it was all a misunderstanding, but the truth hung crystal clear in the room. My practical authority had dismantled her illusion of power in just a few minutes. There were no ugly insults, no flying plates. I simply stood there in complete silence, controlling the space with my presence alone, and watched her artificial, arrogant little world collapse. Within half an hour, the house was almost empty. The hastily invited guests had fled. All that remained were half-full glasses, dirty plates, and an eerie silence. Lena sat stunned on the expensive sofa she'd bought with my money, staring at the floor. My son still stood there, clutching the open envelope, reading the notice over and over, as if the words might change if he stared hard enough. I walked calmly to the table, moved 2 abandoned wine glasses aside, and sat down. I felt no triumph, no nasty satisfaction, just a deep, grounding peace. "You can't just put us out on the street," my son finally said. His voice sounded small, almost like a little boy's. "We won't find an affordable place in this area that fast." I leaned back, relaxed, and looked at him. "You're both working, Marcus. You have good incomes. You'll find an apartment just like millions of other adults do. My job as your mother isn't to let you live rent-free for the rest of my life while treating me like a stranger in my own house." Lena suddenly jumped up. Her grief flipped straight into rage. "You're a selfish, bitter woman. You're just getting revenge because we want to live our own lives." I shook my head slowly. "No, Lena. Live your own lives all you want, just on your own dime from now on. If you demand respect, you have to show it first." I stood up, smoothed my coat, and turned to leave. "You can get moving boxes tomorrow. If you need help packing, hire a company. My money isn't available for that anymore." I left the main house and closed the door behind me. The cold night air felt incredibly good. I took a deep breath and knew the worst was finally over. I had taken back my life, my dignity, and my financial independence with one clean cut. Now I just had to look forward. The next day would be tiring, but I was ready. The weeks after Christmas were strangely busy and cold. Marcus and Lena packed up their things. They barely spoke to me, which honestly was a relief. There were no big reconciliation talks at the kitchen table. No tearful apologies that wouldn't have been sincere anyway. Sometimes I watched my son carry heavy boxes to a rented moving truck. He looked exhausted. The financial reality of moving plus actual market rents had caught up with them fast. Lena tried one last time to pressure me through relatives. My sister called and said I was being too harsh. I simply hung up calmly. I didn't block any numbers, but I also didn't explain myself. If people refused to see the facts, arguments wouldn't help. Instead, I focused on my own fresh start. I had my little apartment painted and cleared out old furniture. The house was officially handed over to the doctor couple at the end of January. The sale price gave me a very comfortable retirement cushion. I rented a beautiful, bright apartment in the city closer to my friends and the cultural things I love. No more yard work. No more waiting for visits from a son who only came out of obligation. I was once again in full control of my time and my money. On the day of the final handover, the 3 of us stood in the empty driveway. My son scuffed his shoe awkwardly on the pavement. "We're moving to Chicago," he said quietly. "Lena got a new job there. You can come visit sometime if you want." It was a half-hearted invitation driven by social politeness, not real warmth. I smiled kindly but kept my distance. Focus on building your own life properly first, I told him. I genuinely wish you both the best with it. It wasn't a dramatic goodbye or a final blow-up. It was simply the end of a toxic dependency. I got in my car and left the old house behind. I never once looked in the rearview mirror. My eyes were only on what lay ahead, where my new free life was already waiting. A year has passed since that Christmas Eve. I'm sitting on the balcony of my third-floor apartment, sipping an espresso and watching the street life below. My life is quieter now, but it's not lonely silence. It's a fulfilled, self-directed peace. Marcus calls occasionally, usually on holidays or birthdays. The conversations stay surface level. We talk about the weather or his job in Chicago. I never hear Lena in the background. That's fine with me. I've stopped chasing some idealized version of family that only worked when I paid and stayed quiet. Love should never be the currency you use to buy respect. I've set a few simple but firm rules for myself. First, I no longer finance other adults' lives. If I give, it's freely and with no strings, but my everyday money is mine alone. Second, my living space is my protected sanctuary. Anyone who wants to enter has to behave like a polite guest, regardless of blood relation. And third, I no longer justify my boundaries. If someone sees my clear decisions as selfish, that only proves how necessary those boundaries really were. These rules aren't walls built from anger, they're guardrails I desperately needed for my own emotional well-being. Some folks my age ask if I regret the drastic step of selling the house. They say family should stick together. I always give the same answer. Togetherness goes both ways. If someone only keeps you in their life to use you, you don't protect the family by enduring it. You just lose yourself. I didn't choose revenge. I chose consequences. I took back my money, my space, and my dignity using the most practical tools I had. That's my story. I didn't wait for a miracle or a savior lawyer. I took responsibility. Now it's your turn. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent? Or would you have stood up for yourself too? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more honest life stories. Take care of yourselves. Sometimes silence isn't about enduring. It's the moment you decide you no longer belong.